Welcome to Baltic World. I'm Charlene.
I'm Crispin.
And this is our Week in Review. Baltic World is where we talk about important issues facing Northern, Central and Eastern Europe. But before we begin, how are you, Crispin?
I'm good. Today,
yeah? Happy birthday! Well, we're actually, falling on your birthday.
That's right. It's working on my birthday. No, but it has been excellent. We went out for lunch and we found...
Which I found...
She did. They advertised so we were going to an Estonian restaurant, which we managed to find. Really nice place, really nice area. They advertised like a traditional rye bread that they were making, but it wasn't ready. But they had a sort of wonderful traditional Estonian pancakes that were absolutely delicious. And there was like a rhubarb wine cider, which is made in Estonia, which was fantastic, particularly since this was the hottest day in the sort of post-winter area. Like obviously we're moving into summer down here. It was a very, sunny, warm day. And that
it's like 35 degrees.
Yeah,
Celsius.
quite warm. Yeah, particularly for October. It was a very warm day. And we took some great footage for our...
Yeah, some cool B-roll. We're trying to experiment with the camera and like on-the-go mic, like vlogging.
Yeah.
But Charlene decided to miss an important cable, so we couldn't do all of our experimentation.
Yeah, so this morning, as part of my sort of birthday gift to myself, I went and bought quite an expensive kind of camera lavalier kit that could connect up our camera to sort of carry on mics on the go. And we took it home to unpack and play with it and learn all the instructions and everything. And then we packed it all away.
Well, we needed batteries, right? We couldn't actually play with it without batteries. So we'll go get batteries and then afterwards we'll experiment it when we're at the restaurant. But my mind, I forgot to bring the cord. So we got the batteries and he's like, where's the cord? But it's not in the box. But we were talking earlier of just how different cultures have different types of carbs.
Yep.
And pancakes is, I don't know, for Chinese food, it's rice is our main source of carbs. Is pancakes really popular?
It's popular in, I think, the Baltic region, France, Russia in particular. And obviously bread in sort of the more Anglo areas. Also what people put in yogurt is I find quite interesting. So also rather what they put on their breakfast muesli. So, in the West, they just pour milk into it and maybe put some sugar on top. Whereas in other parts of the world, they mix it in with yogurt and eat it that way. So yeah, there are kind of interesting variations across different countries in Europe as to the way they like to consume bits of carbs and grains and things like that.
Yeah, I just found it a weird thing because I just associate pancakes with sugar because, that's how white people do it. It's just add as much sugar as you can to a pancake. Yeah, so in Australia, it's getting pretty warm, right, in the Southern Hemisphere. But that really means that Northern Hemisphere is getting colder and it's probably going to get in midwinter soon. Yeah,
I heard some forecasting that the weather was getting sub-zero overnight now, and we don't where I live, it never gets below zero ever any time of the year. I mean, in the dead of winter, it will get close, and it'll have a proper winter chill. You will get cold, but no, you won't have snow or.
Australians complain at 10 degrees Celsius, be it's too cold.
Yeah, and then when we see people from Scotland or whatever dying at 26 degrees, we're just amazed. That is mid-range at best. But no, the Baltics are getting quite cold, and there is a potential for us to get up there. Maybe big question mark around the end of the year, because there is a NATO competition that I'm participating in. I'll leave a link in the description.
Yeah, and what does that involve, the competition?
So NATO is running various scenario testing as part of a planning for various contingencies,
right?
Specifically around strategic communication. So issues of disinformation, cyber, artificial intelligence, social media, the way in which narratives are formed when it comes to sort of hybrid operations that happen between Belarus and Lithuania and places like that. And so they've put out a call for various scenarios. I won't, leave any spoilers here, but I'm preparing various scenarios for that. And that sort of follow some of my own background. When I was working before doing things in the Asia Pacific, I was doing scenario planning and testing with various groups around.
Because my background is not foreign policy at all, and like I just want to know like how common it is to have these types of like competitions or like opportunities to think of scenarios and then have a solution or whatever. Like, is it quite common among countries? Like, do they all have to do it?
No, they don't all have to do it. And in fact, it's kind of rare to have a competition at that level. Like often you will have these kinds of competitions targeted specifically at young people. So people 18 to 24 kind of get their teeth into the area of crisis management, for example. So they'll have these competitions to help encourage people to get into the field and then bring people to camps and get them connected to mentors and
workshop
and then get exposed to people that are a lot more experienced. Whereas this competition done through sort of NATO Stratcom appears to be like a serious contingency planning that you put in your competition for various competition submissions for various scenarios. Those scenarios have to be stress tested under real battlefield conditions. And when I say battlefield, in this case, I don't necessarily just mean, war fighting situations. I mean, you're dealing with, massive cyber events or, a narrative that's undermining your social cohesion or things that are happening on social media that are anomalous or things that are happening in the markets that are anomalous. And then how you then manage that. When you're trying to manage various crisis situations in the international sphere, a good framework for analysis is to divide things up into what you know is a fact. So, at 9:45 a.m. event X occurred, and then person Y said this, person Z said that. Like you scheme out exactly the facts as they are known. And facts, things that everyone agrees on, they're verifiable, falsifiable, they don't rely on anyone's opinion or intuition. You put that into one category. Then you go, what are our assumptions? What are the things that we think could motivate certain things? What are our heuristics around our assumption of what have been happening in the area, things that might be happening behind closed doors, our perceptions of potential adversaries. What are the things that we think might be driving people? We are guessing here, but they're based upon a series of assumptions that we don't know. And then there are the sort of known unknowns. What are the things that we have to find out that we don't know currently in order to make any headway? And then there are things of, okay, how could we be wrong about all of this? And this is something that Graham Allison from Harvard, who is a great strategic thinker and Allison, schematic worker in this model, would say is after we've done the entire exercise, how could all this be wrong? If someone was to come along and say, no, you've got everything upended
because of
X, Y, Z, and so you really need to red team things out to make sure that you've got all your bases covered.
So like dial it back, your facts, is that based on like actual real life scenarios first, or like patterns of behavior you've seen X country do?
Yeah. Well, is
that a fact?
Okay. So here's a simple example. Terrorist bombing happens in place A, right? And then Group B claims responsibility, okay?
Yeah.
Well, what are the facts just from what I've said? Well, there's been a bombing. That's had a certain location and a time and place. You probably have some data around, the casualty numbers as they're presently known. All of that sort of thing. Who was like in the area that you're aware of. And then you would have this group that has claimed responsibility, right? Well, there's a whole lot of assumptions you'd be making as well. That you'd be assuming that this group that's claimed responsibility is responsible. Maybe they're not. Maybe they're just riding a wave. Maybe they have a reason to take responsibility for something that they didn't actually do.
For somebody else.
Or they're trying to claim glory or, And then this group that's claimed responsibility, well, what are their motivations? They have their stated motivations, but you don't necessarily know that's why they chose that particular time and place. Like, for example, let's say someone blows up an airplane, right? Well, they might be doing that because they want to, create mass terror and cause a terrible event. They might just be trying to kill one person. And then you've actually managed to conceal that fact by dealing with a whole bunch of people. No one would really know that, you've actually been targeting an individual because you've got 350 other victims that you've got to, research and work through. And so Sherlock Holmes once said, the best place to hide a needle isn't in a haystack, it's among other needles. So when you're making assumptions, they might be well-founded. They shouldn't, like the fact that something is an assumption shouldn't necessarily prevent you from taking action. But you do put it in a different category on the basis that, new information, new data could supplant that and refine what is presently an unknown.
Then for each thing, do you kind of proxy like a probability percentage of each assumption?
In an ideal world, you absolutely would. Like things that you have high confidence. I mean, the way the intelligence agencies do it is they say, high confidence, medium confidence, some confidence. They don't necessarily put in percentages because that's kind of hard to do.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's exactly right. The degree of certainty with which information is presented, and a lot of data collection, a lot of what intelligence agencies do, a lot of what scouts do in military situations is to refine the resolution, reduce the number of variables that are incomplete, and try and make decisions that are based on complete information. Like the thing about poker that makes it such an extraordinary game is it's a game of incomplete information. If you could see everybody's cards, the game becomes pretty easy, right?
Yeah.
So what you want to be able to do is see everybody else's cards in a crisis situation so that you can make the optimal decision. The less that is unknown, the more optimal your decision-making potential then becomes.
Yeah.
And so when you're dealing with major crisis management situations, one of the things you have to do is do those obvious steps that can increase the amount of information that you presently have, particularly when you're about to make decisions that are highly consequential and you're like, what are the things about this decision that are the risks and how probable are those risks, and can we mitigate those risks by reducing the amount of unknowns? And that's one of the things that these scenarios should be amenable to doing. So the scenarios that you present when you deal with these sort of strategic management crisis situations is how plausible is it? Like, could this happen in the real world? To do that, you have to steel man your adversary, i.e. find the best possible strategy, best possible arguments that your opponents could present against your greatest vulnerabilities. Okay.
Right.
And so because you have to assume the best from your adversary, because that'll make you the most prepared. And if they make mistakes, well, that'll only help you. But in your training scenarios, you really do have to go worst case.
Worst case.
So let's say your opponent is a genius, okay? And they were really trying to undermine your social stability, undermine your national security, social cohesion, and the like. How would they go about this? And so you come up with a scenario that can credibly succeed based upon where you are now, okay?
Yeah.
And then, all right, you've thrown into this situation where you have limited knowledge, but you are in a crisis. What are the ways in which you can uncover what's really going on? And what are the ways that you can successfully navigate this crisis towards a de-escalation, if that's what you want, or an escalation but a controlled one? So this is really a challenging thing, but this is what good strategic thinkers do all of the time, is that they look at a range of possible futures and they come up with a means of operation that's resilient against those various possible outcomes. And that's what readiness and preparedness and good strategy is all about.
It's really interesting. I wonder, I guess it depends on the scenario, right, of like what the outcome you want to get. Because it's a crisis. So you just, like, I'd assume they all kind of want the same thing. Am I wrong? Where like...
Well, most scenarios, so there are some scenarios that you come up with where nobody is at fault, right? If something happens and people make assumptions about, people doing things nefariously or doing things because they have some kind of overarching objective. And it turns out that no, this was just a couple of coincidences, and a lot of decision makers built so much on top of that a narrative took hold, but none of it was true, right? But a lot of scenario planning is about, malicious actors trying to seize objectives. Like certainly in the Indo-Pacific, the United States and Hawaii and Indo-PACOM, they spend a lot of time wargaming out Taiwan situations. China invades Taiwan. How does the US respond? Obviously, Taiwan's objective is to maintain its democracy and sovereignty. China's objective is to reincorporate Taiwan into mainland. America's objective is to deny China that outcome. So there is everyone has very clear lines of victory condition, and those scenarios are still highly complex. Even though the motivations of each actor is clear. But a lot of scenarios are not. Like, let's say you are doing a scenario in which you lose contact with a submarine in the South China Sea. Okay, and they were supposed to check in, they didn't. You can't contact them at all. You don't know what's happened to them. They've just disappeared. You did notice a seismic event kind of nearby. It could be an explosion. They could have been attacked. They could have been, they could have suffered some kind of terrible malfunction and had some detonation. There could have been some kind of seismic event nearby.
Could have been a trader on board.
Yeah, exactly. It could be around for October. There could be... and there could be, the seismic event itself might have knocked out some communications equipment, and you just don't know. Or they could be stranded and they need help. They're stuck and they can't surface, they can't communicate. You've got to locate them as quickly as possible. All of these things could be at play. A lot of unknowns, okay? And then what you have in the scenario is things going on in the background, the sort of political context, the strategic context that makes things of a crisis. So let's say, you think that the submarine has just been disabled somehow. You're really worried that someone else has gone on board it and take it, right? Because they want the secrets that the submarine has. So you make assumptions about the fact that the enemy fleet is operating in the area. Well, maybe it could turn out that they also had a submarine that went missing because there was some sort of seismic event, caused some issue. And they're looking for their lost people, but because they're scouring the area that you lost a submarine, you're assuming that they
stole your submarine.
They stole your submarine, or they dropped depth charges or something like that to knock it out. I mean, all of it, and then things snowball pretty quickly, and then you throw in an accident, and suddenly you've got Cuban Missile Crisis. So the scenario planning is some people's whole career, and so it is really good that the NATO and Europe are thinking about the various scenarios that could be of relevance to Latvia. And I'll be putting in a few submissions to assist, hopefully, in that outcome. Now, the actual competition itself involves, I think they're planning for the end of the year to host their event. Now, I don't know what the end of the year means. I presume it's before Christmas. And if, successful, Charlene and I will hopefully be in Latvia. And we'll get to hang out in Riga. I'll be participating in the training and the debriefing and the scenario testing of what is presented. But hopefully we'll also have time to see the Baltic. So
for sure. But as you describe all the different scenarios, I'm a little bit overwhelmed, Crispin. Like, there's a lot to think about, and I don't know. Is there a particular type of person who you'd recommend go into foreign policy and strategic planning?
Okay, so that's a really big question, actually, and it's something I think about a lot, more so than you probably realize.
Is there enough young people in it?
It's getting better,
right?
Because during the Cold War, there were hundreds of thousands of people thinking about this stuff because you had crisis at every level, at every part of the world, in this bipolar global struggle.
Was it a dinner table
democracy
kind
versus exactly? It was a dinner table, a very good way to put it. Dinner table conversation. Everyone had views on nuclear weapons and so forth. And then when the Cold War ended, everyone went into development, climate change, human rights, all these other things, rule of law, all really important subjects, but grand strategic balance of power, war and peace type stuff really went off the boiler, right?
Fell off the cliff.
Even as nuclear weapons continue to spread to other countries.
And they got bigger. And worse. Right?
Well, it's actually, they got worse. I don't know. They actually got smaller.
Okay.
No,
I mean the size of the impact.
No, that's what I mean. There's a reason. I'll explain it, actually. It's a really good... So, the nuclear weapons are a bit like mobile phones. Okay.
What?
They got big, they got small, they got big again, because, but basically they're still in that smaller phase, because when the Soviet Union, this is a good like history lesson when it comes to nuclear weapons, when the Soviet Union started to fall a little bit behind the United States in rocket technology, okay, because actually even a step back, the Second World War resulted in two major breakthroughs in technology. There were a number of others, but two major ones. One, nuclear weapons, okay?
Yeah.
And two, rockets.
Yeah.
Okay. So the Germans invented the V1, V2, hit London, and of course, Hiroshima and Nagasaki were destroyed by nuclear bombs. After the war, both of those things were invested in parallel. You had the space race and you had nuclear technologies. The United States always maintained a significant advantage in missile technology. The Soviets were very good at nuclear weapons, and they caught up, I think, quite well in terms of manufacture and design of nuclear bombs.
Yeah.
But the Americans just had really polished missiles. Right?
Why?
They had better. Well, okay, so, that's a good question. We'll go down this rabbit hole.
Experts.
Right? The reason is that after the war, the Americans swallowed up all the German scientists. Werner von Braun famously was a leader in the NASA space program. He was also a terrible Nazi that perpetrated awful crimes in the Second World War against the Jewish people. But he was given complete reprieve because he was a genius scientist who helped advance America's missile technology. There was a whole operation where the Soviets got more territory in Eastern Europe, but the Americans got all the intelligentsia. Okay, so they went and uncovered the Peenemünde test facility. They captured all the test pilots. Hannah Reich, who was a famous test pilot, ended up in the United States.
Right.
A lot of people that have been airbrushed out of history for their various offences in the Second World War were given very posh positions in the United States, often in the high levels of the US administration and NASA after the Second World War because of their extraordinary scientific talents, okay? And they were extraordinary. And that gave the United States a significant edge when it came to missile technology that the Soviets never fully overcame. The Soviets got around their own problems in various different ways, but they weren't of the same caliber as America. Now, one of the advantages of having better missiles is that they're more accurate. So the Americans could afford to have nuclear weapons of lower yield because as long as you are hitting your target accurately, you will destroy a city or whatever it is you're trying to blow up quite effectively if you get the optimal airburst and the optimal radius of your nuclear test, right? Whereas the Soviets had to risk the fact that they might be shot down long before they ever hit their targets. In fact, in the early 1960s, they were still using high-level long-range bombers as the Americans had already. So the Soviets were like, we have to make our bombs so big that even if we drop it 100 kilometers away from the target so our planes can get away safely, we will still destroy wherever it is we're attacking. And that led to the infamous Tsar bomb that was 50 megatons in size that melted rock on the Earth, even though it was detonated in the upper atmosphere. And its shockwave was still felt on its third rotation around the Earth.
What? My gosh.
It was one massive bomb. In fact, the design was 100 megatons, but they couldn't get the plane away in time, so they reduced the yield so they could make that happen.
It's kind of like when you have you can't have. It's not like this, right? You have all the fancy equipment in the world, but if you can't use it, then you're ineffective. Whereas Americans had the experts behind them, so they could be more effective with their equipment that they had, right?
That's right. They had, and so now all the major players have very reliable ICBMs. They don't need to have yields of 50 megatons. 1 megaton is more than sufficient to destroy any city they're likely to target. And that's still that 1 megaton explosion is still an explosion far beyond what your imagination can dream up.
Can you give me an example of what you mean? How big impact it would be?
So let's say if a 1 megaton nuclear weapon was detonated in downtown Sydney, let's say above the Centrepoint Tower, the optimal, let's say about 180 meters in the air, all of the CBD would be gone, like just vanished. You would never have dreamt that a city was there at any stage before. Everything out to Parramatta would be completely leveled and everyone would be dead. Parramatta is about a 40 kilometre drive, maybe a bit under, from the CBD. And then from that, you would have probably for the next 5 to 10 kilometres outwards, most houses and things reduced to their foundation. So you would know that there were houses previously there, but they would have been like all the walls and things would be blown in.
Oh, wow.
And then probably another 25 kilometres beyond that, all the windows and things would be blown out. Like you would, if you were caught in that radius, you would have been knocked off your feet and, debris might have hit you and things like that. But you probably would survive. You would have received an unfortunate dose of radiation, probably at that distance, not enough to kill you, but enough to make you sick.
Yeah.
And then you would have the radioactive fallout, which would over the next few days would drift in whatever direction. You certainly wouldn't be able to drink any of the water. You wouldn't want to touch anything. And it would be uninhabitable for an extended period of time.
So why is it not in a conversation? I feel like that's really hard. Like, that's really traumatic and devastating.
Well, it's...
The likelihood of it happening?
Well, I mean...
It's hard to hide, I guess.
It's hard. Well, it's hard. It depends on the situation, right?
True.
And, but it's not negligible. These things are... I mean, I'm a supporter of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, but one of the drawbacks of such a treaty is that people no longer get to see with their own eyes just how powerful these bombs are, right? So because there's not much testing, nuclear advancements are much slower. So it's not like we're building bigger and better bombs in the way that we once were. There's reliability questions about whether or not nuclear weapons would even work successfully because people aren't testing them properly, Maintaining them becomes increasingly difficult. A lot of these bombs weren't designed to be extended over this period of time.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, these nuclear weapons do exist and people still do make them. If they saw how massive a nuclear explosion was, particularly with modern hydrogen, tritium fueled devices, then they would be much more humble about the site. I mean, I remember that there was a terrible explosion. This will put it in perspective. I don't know if you recall, there was that explosion in Lebanon. You might not remember the ammonium thing that was about 10 ton. It was about 100 tons, I think, of worth of yield. Okay, to put that in perspective, your average hydrogen device would be about 100,000 times as powerful as that explosion. So that killed 150 people and destroyed a significant chunk of the city. Now, when I say 100,000 times the size, I don't mean that it's going to be as 100,000 times as big.
That's what I was thinking.
Because it's a cubic calculation, right? Because it's all spreading out in a 360 degree direction. So it'll still be many, many, many hundreds of times more like significant when you saw it than what you saw on the screen, although the actual damage wouldn't be 100,000 times as much. It'd be more like 1,000 times.
Yeah. Oh, that's scary. I don't know. And I guess, now I can see the complete significance of not pre-planning, scenario planning for worst case, especially around nuclear weapons. And the thing is, like, I do remember that chart. You know how they compare, like, Hiroshima to, like, the available nuclear weapons now and how big the mushroom cloud is.
Yeah, so Hiroshima was about 15 kilotons. You can do the maths in your head. 15 kilotons. So 15,000 tons of TNT all detonated at once, okay?
Yeah.
And a 1 megaton is obviously 1 million tons of TNT all detonated at once. And the average size now would be about 1 megaton, roughly.
1 megaton.
Well, 300 kilotons to 1 megaton, in that range.
Yeah. Oh, it makes me nervous. Yeah. But to see, good luck, world. No, right?
It's fine. It's fine.
Yeah, no, it is good. And I think, I mean, it's all about security, right? Like, you need to have these things in place to...
Yeah, it's a weird...
I'm a bit, like, annoyed by it, really. Like, I don't really agree. Like, I do agree with the ICAN movement of, like, abolishing nuclear weapons, but I know it's not practical, but I'm still, like, a hopist.
Okay, so here's the problem with ICAN, right? Is if you ask someone the question, and it's like anything with complexity, if you ask someone the question, would you prefer if nuclear weapons did not exist?
Yes.
You'll get a lot of people to say yes, okay? But the problem is that we can't go back to a world... So there's two big problems. The first is you can't go back to a world in which no one knows how to make them, because you can't uninvent that knowledge, right? Yeah, like if you could go back in time and be like, okay, before the atom was ever split, before we understood how fission works, anything like that, and say, okay, would we, ignoring the benefits of nuclear power and everything else, just say, like, would we want to have the ability to make a nuclear bomb? A lot of people would say, no, we wouldn't want that. That was a mistake, right? But then, okay, well, you can't undo the knowledge of how to make one, okay?
Right.
So... Is
it based on basic science? Is that why?
Well, it's basic. Well, it's known science. They're not easy to make, but they're easy to understand. Okay. And so that's the first problem. The second problem is the how we get from here to there. Okay, right. Here from being the nuclear weapons that we presently have to a world without nuclear weapons, and in order to get from here to there, a lot of more dangerous things happen. Now, don't have time to get into it for this video, but as you progress people through it, and you're like, okay, so you reduce your stockpile by this amount, but then these things happen. Are you comfortable with these things? Okay. And then people go, yes, I'm willing to take these risks, or actually this one is too far, right? And like one example, what happens if Israel gives up its nuclear weapons? Israel no longer exists.
Pretty much.
Like, we just have to accept that.
Yeah.
So... are we willing to accept that? Are we willing to accept this country being wiped off the map? You know, is there another way that we could provide an assurance without nuclear weapons? Probably not. You know, but then also, okay, you might want to get rid of nuclear weapons, but is North Korea going to give up its nuclear weapons?
Also, what if North Korea didn't exist? Would the harm be less?
Yes, I mean, this is the thing. You have to. Now, I'm not saying it's an unworthwhile aspiration. Like, you should do so, but you should do so pragmatically and practically and where possible. It's not like managing nuclear risk is the art of the possible, the art of the incremental. And so it's not, sexy like ICAN's, like, we'll ban all nuclear weapons. I mean, that's not living in the real world. You have to do things based on where you're at and go, okay, will the dial be moved? Will we be in a better place than we are now if we do X, Y, and Z? Is X, Y, and Z possible? And that's where I focus my attention. Yeah. Like, if I can incrementally help improve safety and security in the world by a small margin, then over a Pareto distribution, if you wash that across the entire world, then that is a significant windfall. And I think that's where most nuclear thinkers are at. But sometimes it means doing things that seem slightly evil, like actually coming up with new technologies, new weapons, new things like that in specific situations, if the overall net benefit is going to be one of increased peace and stability and democracy and freedom and liberty and human rights. So this is not a perfect world. So when you asked me the question before, what sort of person should go into this field? People who are willing to look at the world as it is, who have their own internal self-direction understanding of who they are, but are willing to be flexible, not in terms of their ethics and morals, but be flexible in terms of seeing things from different points of view and understanding where different actors are coming from and their narratives and their perceptions on things. So not being a moral relativist and saying that, look, everyone's equal. I think Western culture is better than Saudi culture, for example. But understanding what their motivations and drives are and realizing that humans are more or less similar in some respects all around the world. Then also being really good at cost benefit analysis, at game theory is a really useful skill, and most importantly, have an interest in history. I think this is the number one talent of a strategist. If you can understand previous patterns where things of similar nature happened in the past, you can derive important lessons from it. If you understand an individual country's past, you'll understand how they see themselves and their interests in the world, and you'll be able to apply that in a realpolitik, realist geopolitical framework as to how they perceive their interests and goals. And if you can do that, then you can anticipate their behavior in ways that is deeply constructive. And it's not something that people do have a natural talent for it, but it's still something that you have to work and train for. And I feel
like you need a lot of resilience as well, though.
You need a lot of emotional resilience, but you also need... it's like I said earlier in the actual crisis management scenarios. You want to reduce the things that you don't know, okay? And if you know a lot, if you actually go to the places that you're trying to understand, if you can read the languages, if you can do the history and everything, if you can interact with people there, then you do reduce the amount of things that you don't know. If you've got people in other governments that you trust and can trust you, then you can share information in a responsible way. That can help, mitigate these crises. So I'll give you a big example. General Milley in the United States got into a hell of a lot of trouble. He did one thing terribly badly, but one thing that was also correct. The thing that he did correct was, and the scenario...
Who's General Milley first?
General Milley is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the United States.
Okay.
And when the January 6th, I'm not going to say riots happened, I say protests, right? Mm-hmm. He received a call from his counterpart in the Chinese military, who was afraid that Donald Trump, this is all in a book, right? Donald Trump was afraid, that this Chinese general was afraid that Donald Trump would start a war with China to prevent himself from leaving office. This is how insane it was, okay? So the Chinese leadership was concerned that there would be some kind of military event that would happen in the Western Pacific because Trump was about to leave office, and this would be a way for Donald Trump to cling to power as if there was some major war, okay? It was insane.
Mate, he just wanted to take Texas back.
It was insane. It was totally insane. But General Milley got on the phone to his counterpart and said, no, this is not what's going to happen. Democracy is messy. There is no imminent attack going to occur. That China is perfectly safe. There will be a peaceful transition of power, and just, cool your heels, right? And I think that is a very responsible... Like, he was criticized for that. Like, why are you talking to the Chinese military? Blah, blah, blah. Like, you need to be able to have these channels of dialogue in order to make sure that things are not taken out of context. And that's why the red line was installed between the Kremlin and Washington after the Cuban Missile Crisis. So as the next time there was a major crisis, the president of the United States and the secretary of the Communist Party in Moscow could speak directly and sort out whatever issue it was, right? Yeah,
before a catastrophe
happens, right?
I agree.
So that was Milley's correct approach. Where he went treasonously bad was actually trying to usurp the control of nuclear weapons from the president. There was a story about that. And he was also speaking to Nancy Pelosi.
Yes, I have heard this story. Yes.
Exactly. And that's totally outrageous. Like his responsibility is to the commander-in-chief of the day, which was President Donald Trump. He shouldn't be going in through domestic politics behind people's back, and so he should be held accountable for that. But the actual keeping dialogue open with potential military adversaries is a really good idea within certain contexts, of course. You need to do that in a transparent way. Milley needed to be accountable for doing that. Like, he shouldn't have done it on his own. He should have made other people aware this was happening and made sure that there was a record and everything so that people could understand what was said. But yeah, I mean, the actual idea that these things were happening is a good idea. You want this miscalculation reduced.
And do you think, all right, this is me being idealistic, but to have these conversations, have these dialogues, do you think things can be resolved within the Baltic and Russia through dialogues and ongoing relationship building?
Okay, so I'm not a hater, right?
Yeah.
I know a lot of people despise Russia for the many things that it's done and is doing. And some things are outrageous. The downing of MH17, the use of nerve agents in foreign countries to assassinate people, the incarceration of Alexei Navalny, the propping up of Lukashenko.
Yeah.
There are just so many things that the Putin regime is doing that is unacceptable. Okay. But if I think about the Russian people, their story, their history, their narrative, their sense of self, it's hard for me to hate them. Like they've gone through enormous struggles of their own kind. It's always been difficult to be Russian. They lost more than the rest of the world combined by a large margin during the Second World War.
Yeah.
And they won the pivotal battles. And then you've got great authors like Dostoevsky and composers like Tchaikovsky and Rachmaninoff and authors, poets like Pushkin and various architects. Like it's a tremendous history, huge human contribution.
Yeah.
So I would like to think that things could improve between Russia and the rest of the West, because Russia is ultimately of the West. Yes, they have a huge geography in Asia, but they're a Western culture and Western identity and Western history.
When you say that, what do you mean?
Well, their
Like
royal
Western
families had
identity.
all intermarried with the rest of Europe.
Yeah.
They speak a European language. They have European architecture. They have a European-esque religion in Orthodox Christianity. So, but they're a Western nation, right? Like, ultimately. But they have a very different self-conception and a very different narrative. And so I do believe that there is a path, however narrow, towards an improved relationship between the Baltic and Russia and the West. Right?
Yeah.
What's more, it's in Russia's interest, because at the moment they are so coddled up to China that one day they will be China's slave. Like at the moment, China,
like North Korea. I feel
worse than that. I mean, it's like imagine China achieves all of its strategic objectives.
So it takes Taiwan,
becomes the world's dominant power, pushes America to the North Atlantic, and controls Asia effectively, and is the world's dominant power by far. Okay. Well, in that relationship, Russia is at China's absolute mercy. There are fewer than 6 million people are in the entire Russian Far East. Significant urban centers in the Far East, including Vladivostok, were former Chinese territories. Right. China will just tell Russia what's what, and Russia will either comply or suffer. Those will be the two options. And they won't have any other friends in the world. It'd be much better for Russia to be able to pivot to the West, help be part of the victorious West. And I think deep down in the Russian soul, that's what they would really prefer, like Western civilization, of which they were a successful, victorious part, to defeat China rather than to be a Chinese puppet, right? But they don't really have that option at the moment, because after taking bites out of Ukraine, after violating international law, after being a persistent threat to the Baltic countries, the rest of the world cannot and should not deal with them.
It's a lack of trust, to be honest.
And understandable. I mean, if let's say you've got a large Russian minority in Latvia and Estonia, which they do, they have by far and away the highest proportion of Russian speakers outside of the Russian Federation other than Ukraine. Russia says, we are there to have suzerainty over all Russian speakers wherever they are to protect their interests, and that's why we're invading Ukraine. Well, how are you going to take that in Latvia and Estonia, right? That your national sovereignty, your borders are not secure, that the Russia at any time could decide that it's going to incorporate the Russian speakers into its territory, and therefore half of your own country goes, right? This is, and then just these assassinations that are taking place, both domestically in Russia of journalists, of dissidents, and then the use of nerve agents abroad in countries like the UK. It's what the Russian regime is doing is disastrous.
What is their strategic objective if they're doing all these different things?
It's in a really complicated picture. In some ways, Russia is a strange coalition of 4 different really powerful groups. One is the former KGB, current FSB, of which Putin is sort of a figurehead. Then there's the oligarchs, of which you've got the Gazprom types, Medvedev, those sorts of people. Then you've got the church, because the church has been really reconstituted since the end of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union made everyone believe in Marxism and Leninism and the communist ideology. Well, when that disappeared, what replaced Russianness was the Orthodox faith as the safeguarders of Orthodox identity, of Russian identity. And so the church is extremely powerful socially, okay? And then the mafia. There is a lot of crime in Russia, a lot of crime in the EU emanates from Russia, and they have a weird kind of relationship with the Russian government where they sort of avoid one another as long as they work together in certain joint national security kind of interests. So a lot of the disruption that happens in the Baltic countries, for example, or Eastern Europe, or Western Europe for that matter, is Russian criminal organizations. So this is weird kind of it not like it has the appearance of one strong leader like dominating the whole place, but in fact the picture is one of patronage and corruption and patchwork of centers of power.
And that's why you see the narrow opportunity.
I think it's very narrow, but the reason I think it's there is because deep down, that's what the Russians want. Like, I know this. Like, I know that when the Russians look at the future 100 years from now, 200 years from now, they're not thinking we're going to be servants of China. Like, that's just not the way they see it. They're saying that, okay, Russia is going to be great again, and we will be part of the respected nations for which they want respect from, and that's not China. That's the Europeans. That's the United States, and therefore they need to be able to contribute to that kind of world. You know, if they've written out the picture completely, then they're not going to be able to do that. So I think that ultimately they would prefer the West won if they were on the side of the West. But there's not getting from where we are now to a place where people can work with Russia in the West, even if against China, is a long road. There's a strong structure of interests where the rest of the world has a strong interest to work with Russia.
Yeah.
But what the Russian government is doing is not conducive to that outcome. The other problem is the domestic narrative in the United States. When Trump was elected, Washington just went hysterical about Russian interference, Russian information, Russia control of elections, the Mueller investigation, the FBI.
It fell out of nowhere, I feel.
And it fell completely flat. There was nothing in it. But so many parts of the United States could not believe that Trump got elected legitimately. They just couldn't process how this could have happened. And they were willing to believe any insanity, no matter how delusive.
Yeah, and did that damage the relationship with Russia?
Of course it did. It made any kind of relationship with Russia impossible. Now, that's not to say that it was the only thing that happened. I mean, during that time was when the whole Novichok nerve agent thing happened, and Trump rightly expelled a bunch of diplomats from the United States. So Russia did things to contribute to that perception. But it really helped Putin, this kind of... When you've got the United States absolutely wall-to-wall obsessed with the power of the Russian Federation to control American narratives, well, that makes your leader look very powerful. If you're a Russian, you're like, Putin can do all that to the Americans. So it gave Putin legitimacy that he didn't deserve, and really made Washington policy incompetent for several years.
Yeah, I don't even think about it that way. And when mistakes happen, you add clout to your enemy. Not enemy, but you know what I mean? Like,
He turned Putin into a giant.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
And this is a country with 1/3 the GDP of Germany. You know, it's not a peer competitor of the United States. But it is in the dreams of them under the bed, you know. Yeah,
interesting. No, interesting. We went to review videos, but we kind of went around in circles, which is fine. I think it's all relevant. And for those interested in foreign policy and strategic, what is that called? Planning? Is that what it's called?
Strategic planning, strategic analysis.
Yeah.
Strategic thinking.
Yeah, it's kind of opened my eyes a bit. And I have a public health background, so definitely interesting in that way. But aside from that, right, we've been delving in to learning Lithuanian and failing. Actually, our audience has been really nice to us.
Really nice about it. really good about it.
Like
And-
blaming the robot, which took me by surprise.
yeah, so that's the lesson we have to take away from it, is that we need proper Lithuanian speakers. People have been sending me private messages saying, look, that robot doesn't know how to speak Lithuanian. Because what we did was we found a web page that had names, phonetics, speech, and we just thought that's perfect, right? We'll try
amazing.
that. But clearly that technology is not as reliable as we'd hoped, and because we don't know good from bad, we'll find some Lithuanian speakers who live locally perhaps, and help us with the lessons, but also when it comes to finding apps and technology that's really reliable, then we will get their advice. But if you actually know of any particularly good Lithuanian language apps that you think speak it appropriately and that would be good use for this video and for other audiences, let us know in the description. We will in the comment section, because we will download it and use it.
And have some practice at it. Definitely. And I definitely now, like, second attempt, like I want to apply all the tips and tricks from everyone commenting on our video, because there were some really good ones, like just tones. Like I didn't think about it at first, but I have seen it before. But yeah, because in Chinese we also have tones, and it's very different when you add a tone to it. You don't just say things flat out. But yeah, and I one of the comments was really heartwarming. It's like, as you went on, you actually got better.
I thought we did, actually, as we kind of worked out the rules of thumb for various things, but we might have worked out wrong rules. That's the thing. The robot apparently was so bad.
Yeah.
But no, the comments with all the special characters explaining how they work is great. And then there was one comment about how like their 5-year-old was reading Lithuanian, doesn't understand Lithuanian, but could read it well and speak it out aloud, like at least enunciate the words.
Yeah.
Which means, there are obviously clear rules that we could follow and learn to read off a page relatively well. So it's one of our commitments to you guys that by this time next year, next birthday, we will be able to at least speak some Lithuanian, and then when we read, we'll be able to read it clearly, even if we don't know what we're eating.
And like, I think 2 tips that really stood out to me was, how I pointed out, we got to shorten the last bit, but actually it's informal when you shorten things. Like in Australia, like we just shortened everything. We don't talk proper English here. And then, like there's the tones and everything, but also how the way we attempted it, people would still understand us. So in Chinese, if you really get it wrong, it's really difficult to figure out what you're saying. Because tones are very important. But in Lithuanian, it sounds like if you have attempt at it, people can figure it out.
Yes, apparently. I mean, we don't know yet. We'll see. Like if we're in
they understood it. Well, they had the names underneath.
Yes, that's one helpful situation. But I can imagine us being in Lithuania. Let's say we're in some rural area where people, don't speak much English. And we're speaking Lithuanian, whether or not they would still understand us, even if we like spoke the words but not in the right way. Whether they could understand. It'd be a good test case to see. We'll find out soon enough, hopefully.
For sure. And maybe we can try other languages too.
Well, reading that wine bottle for the Estonian, that looked challenging as well. And Estonian is a very different language to Lithuanian and Latvian, because it's much more Nordic, Finnish related. So that's actually one of the things, and I'll do a video on this at some point, where describing the region is really hard. So they're all
quite different, right? The Baltic are different in some ways.
Yeah, and when you look at it when I look at a map, I look at it from a strategic lens, as we've been discussing.
Yeah.
And we've got like these Nordic countries that have similarities and differences with the Baltic countries. And if you were in Asia or a different part of the world, you would group that whole region together in one group. You would have Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, all in one group, Poland, and describe them as one sort of theatre, if you wish. Right? And they do have a deep history together, okay? But the Nordic countries kind of prefer to be described as Nordic, and I don't really know why that is. I'm sure there's a reason, and I'll do the research and find out. Perhaps it's some kind of Viking linkage or something like that. I'm not sure. And then the Baltic countries they have a lot of similarities in that they have very shared interests, values. They've gone through some shared experiences in the occupation and so forth.
Yeah.
But they do have other differences. Like, Estonian is very different to Lithuanian, for example. So how do we group Estonia with Lithuania when Estonia and Finland have linguistic similarities, and yet Finland would be a Nordic country and Estonia would be a Baltic country? Like these are weird classification challenges. Like it'd be like saying Australia is in one region but New Zealand is in another. That would be really hard to do. So conceptually, I'm trying to work this out, and perhaps there's a new word we need to come up with that describes that theatre that everyone is comfortable being grouped in. Because at the moment,
do you know the whole old, like when they say the Baltic countries, is that because it influenced the Baltic Sea? Really?
Well, yes, that more it makes sense.
That shares,
but that's how you should do it, right? Like, if you say, okay, the Baltic countries was everything that's on the Baltic Sea, perhaps minus Russia, right? But the way we describe Baltic countries is basically the three: Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, and then sometimes Poland. It's not.
Yeah, it's not clear cut.
It's not clear cut. And I think there are political reasons, historical reasons, social reasons. And I'll do a video exploring that at some point once I've clarified the issues and
it'll be interesting to untangle.
Propose a solution.
Anyway, I think that's all the time we have for today. Any questions, any feedback, please leave them down below. Otherwise, stay safe and
ciao for now.